We don't matter to you, do we? My sister Stephanie cried out, her voice piercing the tense air of my living room. You are so heartless, my parents shouted in unison, their faces red with indignation. I sat at the head of the Thanksgiving table and smiled completely unmoved. Believe me, I care, I replied quietly. Then I hit play on my phone. The audio recording filled the room, echoing off the high ceilings of my penthouse. The shock on my family's faces shattered like glass. The crystal wine goblet slipped from my mother Barbara's hand, crashing onto the hardwood floor in a spray of red liquid. I tossed a thick manila folder onto the center of the table right next to the roasted turkey. Do not worry about the catering bill tonight, I said, leaning back in my chair. I already paid for this dinner using the very house you are all standing in. My name is Caroline. I am 33 years old, and I work as a financial risk auditor at a major corporate firm in Chicago. For years, I played the role of the reliable, obedient daughter while my family drained me dry. But that Thanksgiving was the night I finally burned their parasitic world to the ground. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family that treated you like a walking ATM while treating your sibling like royalty. The explosion at Thanksgiving did not happen out of nowhere. The match was lit exactly 1 week earlier on a freezing Thursday evening. I had just finished a brutal 10-hour shift analyzing risk portfolios when my phone rang. It was my mother Barbara demanding I come immediately to Le Petit Chateau, one of the most exclusive and outrageously expensive French restaurants in downtown Chicago. She claimed it was a family emergency that could not be discussed over the phone. Panicked that someone was in the hospital, I skipped dinner and drove straight through rush-hour traffic. I rushed into the dimly lit restaurant expecting tragedy. Instead, I found my family lounging at a prime corner booth, finishing off their third bottle of vintage Bordeaux. My father Richard sat at the head of the table looking perfectly healthy and entirely too pleased with himself in his tailored suit. Next to him sat my mother Barbara, adjusting her diamond earrings. Across from them was my younger sister Stephanie, the undisputed golden child of the family, and her husband Malik. Malik is a 32-year-old African-American man who insists on calling himself an elite investment broker despite never actually producing a single successful venture. He was leaning back against the leather booth, picking his teeth, and casually twisting a heavy solid gold Rolex on his wrist. There was no emergency. There was only the dessert menu and a thick leather check folder sitting in the exact center of the table. "Oh, good, you made it?" my mother said, not bothering to stand up or offer me a seat. She slid the leather folder across the white tablecloth, stopping it right in front of me. "You need to take care of this. Malik just bought a brand new Porsche Cayenne to impress his new business partners, so things are a little tight for them this month. Your father and I miraculously forgot our credit cards at home." I stared at the leather folder, then at my mother. I opened it and felt the breath leave my lungs. $2,500. They had ordered imported caviar, dry-aged steaks, and champagne that cost more than my first car. "You want me to pay $2,500 for a dinner I did not even eat?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Stephanie rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, dramatic sigh that made nearby diners turn their heads. "God! Caroline, do you always have to be so difficult about money? It is just dinner. Malik is closing a massive real estate deal next month anyway. We are going to be incredibly wealthy, and you are going to feel stupid for being so stingy." Malik did not say a word. He just smirked, looking at me like I was a stubborn employee rather than his sister-in-law. He took a slow sip of his sparkling water, adjusting his French cuffs so the Rolex caught the light from the crystal chandelier above us. He had just bought a luxury sports car, and they wanted me to pay for their caviar. "I work 60 hours a week," I said, looking directly at my father, hoping for some shred of reason. "Dad, you cannot expect me to drop thousands of dollars on a Tuesday night because your son-in-law wanted to play pretend billionaire." My father slammed his palm against the table, making the silver cutlery rattle. Do not disrespect Malik like that. He is building a legacy for your sister. You live alone in an apartment with no husband and no children to provide for. You hoard your high salary and your perfect credit score while your sister is out here trying to build a family. The least you can do is support them. You are the older sister. It is your duty to step up when the family needs it. I looked at the four of them. My mother looking at me with pure disdain. My father demanding my absolute submission. My sister acting like a victimized princess. And Malik the grifter sitting there in a designer suit paid for by my parents enabling behavior. This was the dynamic of my entire life. Growing up, Stephanie got private tutors and horseback riding lessons while I worked retail jobs to pay for my own college textbooks. When Stephanie married Malik, my parents took out a second mortgage to pay for their lavish destination wedding. When I passed my grueling certification exams, my mother sent me a text message with a single thumbs-up emoji. I was never a daughter to them. I was a safety net, a bank account, a convenient backup plan for whenever Stephanie and Malik lived beyond their means. I looked down at the bill again. The anger inside me, usually buried under layers of conditioned obedience, began to boil. But I knew causing a scene here would only give them the ammunition to call me unstable and jealous. I needed to get out of there. I pulled my corporate credit card from my wallet and placed it in the folder. My mother smiled a triumphant little smirk while Stephanie went back to scrolling on her phone. "Thank you, Caroline," my mother said, her tone instantly sweetening. "Now sit down and order a salad. We have more important things to discuss about Thanksgiving next week." I handed the folder to the waiter, but I did not sit down. I had no idea that this ridiculous restaurant bill was just a distraction. I had no idea that while they were making me pay for their extravagant dinner, they were already executing a much darker plan behind my back. The real betrayal was waiting for me the moment I checked my banking app. I handed the leather folder to the waiter, but remained standing. My mother pointed at the empty chair next to her. "Sit down, Caroline. We need to finalize the Thanksgiving plans. Since you recently moved into that flashy new penthouse downtown, your father and I decided it is the perfect venue for the holiday." I stared at her in disbelief. "You decided?" Richard crossed his arms, leaning back with an air of absolute authority. "Yes, we decided. Your apartment has floor-to-ceiling windows and a chef kitchen that you barely use. It is only fitting that you host the family this year. Stephanie wants to invite some of Malik's new business partners to show them how well the family is doing. You will handle the catering, the decorations, and the drinks. Make sure you order that imported wine Malik likes." I gripped the edge of the chair, my knuckles turning white. "You want me to host a massive Thanksgiving dinner for Malik's business associates at my home and pay for all of it? It is the least you can do," my father said, his voice hardening. "But that is not the only reason we called you here tonight. We have a much bigger opportunity to discuss." Malik finally sat up straight, adjusting his designer tie. He pulled a glossy but cheaply printed brochure from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table toward me. "I am launching a new tech logistics firm," he announced, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "It is going to disrupt the entire supply chain industry. I have the vision and the connections. I just need a little seed capital to get the servers running." My father nodded proudly as if Malik had just cured a major disease. "Malik has an incredible business model, Caroline. The banks are being unnecessarily difficult with his loan applications right now because of a few minor credit hiccups in the past. We need you to liquidate some of your savings to get this off the ground." I looked at the brochure, then at my father. "You want me to give him my savings? It is an investment," Stephanie chimed in, rolling her eyes. "You will get it back with interest once the company goes public. Dad says you have hundreds of thousands just sitting in mutual funds doing nothing. You are being completely selfish by hoarding it when your own brother-in-law is trying to build an empire." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. An empire. I looked directly at Malik. "This is your fourth startup in 5 years, Malik. Let us review the history, shall we? First it was the crypto mining farm that went bankrupt. Then the luxury sneaker resale app that also went bankrupt. Then the organic dog food subscription service, which ended with you owing $30,000 to vendors. You have filed for bankruptcy 3 times. You do not have minor credit hiccups. You have a documented history of burning through other people's money. Malik's smug expression faltered, his jaw clenching. I was learning the market, he muttered defensively. Those were stepping stones. They were financial disasters, I corrected him, my voice sharp and unwavering. As a risk auditor, I assess financial liabilities for a living. And Malik, you are a walking liability. I will not give you a single dime of my hard-earned savings to fund another delusion. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Stephanie slammed her hands on the table and burst into loud theatrical tears. Her face crumpled into a mask of pure tragedy, sobbing so forcefully that people 2 tables away stopped eating to stare at us. You always do this, she wailed, pointing a manicured finger at me. You hate seeing me happy. You are so jealous that I found a man who loves me, that I have a real marriage and a beautiful life. You cannot stand the fact that Malik has big dreams while you sit alone in a cold apartment crunching numbers for a boss who does not care about you. You are trying to sabotage my husband because you are bitter. My mother immediately wrapped her arms around Stephanie, glaring at me with pure venom. Look what you have done, Caroline. Are you happy now? You are a cold, heartless woman. I am protecting my financial future, I shot back. What future? My mother practically screamed, leaning across the table. You have no family. You have no husband. You have no children. You only care about your bank accounts and your credit score because you have absolutely nothing else in your life. You do not know how to love. You do not know what it means to sacrifice for the people you care about because you are completely empty inside. Stephanie is your sister. She is trying to build a legacy. If you had an ounce of family loyalty, you would write that check right now and apologize to Malik. My father stood up, his face red with rage. He pointed a stern finger at my face. I am deeply disappointed in you, Caroline. We raised you to support your family. If you refuse to help Malik, you are no longer welcome in this family. You will host Thanksgiving. You will fund this startup. Or you will face the consequences. The sheer audacity of their demands left me breathless. They were demanding my home, my money, and my submission, while simultaneously tearing down my entire existence. They weaponized my single status, my career, and my independence, framing my financial prudence as a moral failure. In their twisted reality, setting a basic boundary made me the villain, while Malik, the serial grifter, was the victim. I looked at Stephanie, who was still fake crying into my mother's shoulder, though I could see her peeking at me through her fingers, checking to see if her performance was breaking me down. I looked at Malik, who was crossing his arms and pouting like a scolded child. And I looked at my parents, who stood ready to disown me over a man who had never worked an honest day in his life. I am not giving him my money, I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm. And I am not hosting your vanity dinner. I turned my back on them and walked away from the table, heading toward the front counter to retrieve my credit card from the waiter. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a mix of adrenaline and deep-seated exhaustion. I had finally said no. I had finally drawn a line in the sand. But as I reached the host stand, I had no idea that my refusal was already too late. They did not need my permission to take my money. They had already found another way to steal it. I walked toward the host stand at the front of the restaurant, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The sound echoed in my ears, a sharp contrast to the dull roar of anger still thrumming in my veins. Leaving that table was the most empowering thing I had done in years, but my hands were still shaking slightly. The sheer audacity of their demands played on a loop in my mind. Fund Malik and his imaginary tech logistics firm. Host a Thanksgiving dinner for his shady business partners. Sacrifice my entire financial stability so my golden child sister could play the role of a wealthy socialite. I reached the mahogany host stand where the manager was waiting with the leather bill folder. He offered a polite, sympathetic smile, clearly having noticed the dramatic scene unfolding at our corner booth. I took a deep breath, smoothing my blazer, and forcing my professional risk auditor mask back into place. I just wanted to pay the $2,500 and get out of this suffocating place. I reached into my designer wallet and pulled out my primary platinum credit card. I never carried a balance. My finances were meticulously managed. I tapped the card against the payment terminal, expecting the familiar approving beep. Instead, the terminal flashed a bright red error message. Declined. The manager blinked, looking slightly embarrassed. He cleared his throat. I am sorry, ma'am. The transaction did not go through. Would you like to try inserting the chip? I frowned. That card had a credit limit higher than what most people made in a year. I inserted the chip. The machine processed for a few agonizing seconds before loudly beeping again. Declined. Contact card issuer. A cold prickle of unease washed over the back of my neck. This made absolutely no sense. I was meticulous with my accounts. I pulled out my backup travel rewards card, a premium account I kept completely pristine for emergencies. I handed it to the manager. Try this one, I said, keeping my voice even though a bizarre sense of panic was beginning to flutter in my chest. He swiped it. The machine beeped again. Declined. The manager gave me a look of polite pity, the kind reserved for people trying to dine far above their tax bracket. Perhaps you need to verify the purchases with your bank, he suggested quietly. Fraud protection can be quite sensitive with large restaurant bills. Yes, I muttered, stepping away from the counter. Let me just check my application. I walked over to a quiet alcove near the coat check, pulling my smartphone from my purse. My hands felt clammy. As a financial risk auditor, dealing with rejected transactions was my worst nightmare. I opened my primary banking application expecting to see a simple fraud alert notification that I could quickly bypass. Face ID unlocked the screen and the dashboard loaded. The breath was physically knocked out of my lungs. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the numbers staring back at me. My available checking balance was completely drained down to an alarming $42. But that was not the worst part. A bright red banner stretched across the top of my financial dashboard, screaming a severe credit alert. I tapped the notification and my credit monitoring page loaded. My pristine credit score, a number I had spent over a decade carefully building and protecting, to an elite 810, had plummeted. It now sat at a devastating 512. I leaned against the textured wallpaper of the alcove, trying to steady my spinning head. This was impossible. You do not drop 300 points overnight unless something catastrophic has occurred. My risk auditor brain immediately went into overdrive, shutting down the rising panic and replacing it with cold clinical analysis. I clicked into the detailed credit report, scanning the recent inquiries and new accounts. My eyes darted across the tiny text, analyzing dates, amounts, and creditor names. Every single digit burned itself into my memory. I scrolled past my regular mortgage payments, past my zero-balance credit cards. Then I saw it. Sitting right there under recently opened accounts was a massive, unfamiliar line of credit. It was a home equity loan. The total principal amount was exactly $150,000. It had been fully approved and disbursed just 4 days ago. The lending institution was a small regional credit union located in the deep suburbs, a tiny local bank I had never once set foot inside. The loan was secured directly against the equity of my downtown Chicago penthouse, the home I had worked grueling 80-hour weeks to pay off early. My vision tunneled. The walls of the restaurant seemed to close in around me. Someone had taken out a massive second mortgage on my home. $150,000 was gone, drawn completely in my name, using my immaculate credit history, and legally binding my property as physical collateral. I tapped the loan details, desperately reading the transaction history. The entire amount had been wired out of the credit union the exact same business day it was funded. It was completely transferred to an external trust account that I did not recognize. I looked up from my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the glass partition of the dining room, I could clearly see my family still sitting at the corner booth. Stephanie was laughing at something Malik said. Malik was leaning back, holding up his wrist, so the dining room lights caught the heavy, solid gold face of his brand new Rolex watch. The same Malik who had just bought a luxury Porsche Cayenne he paraded around in all week. The same Malik who claimed he just needed seed money for a tech logistics firm. They did not need me to write a check tonight. They did not actually care if I agreed to fund his pathetic startup. The entire dinner, the guilt-tripping, the demands, the theatrical tears from Stephanie, it was all a smokescreen, a distraction. My own parents had not just enabled a grifter, they had actively participated in devastating my financial life. To secure a home equity loan, you need tax documents, you need intimate property details, and most importantly, you need an authorized signature. I squeezed my phone until my knuckles ached. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The sick, twisted truth of how they bypassed the bank security protocols was already forming in my mind. I did not scream. I did not march back to the table and flip their expensive champagne into their laps. Instead, a profound, terrifying calmness washed over me. They had chosen to treat me not as a daughter, but as a financial target. I slipped my phone back into my purse. I walked back to the host stand, handed the manager my corporate expense card, which finally processed the transaction, and walked out into the freezing Chicago night. The war had just begun. The freezing Chicago wind bit through my wool blazer as I practically sprinted to my car parked down the street. I slammed the door shut, locking out the city noise, and plunged into the absolute silence of the leather interior. My hands were still trembling, but my mind was operating with terrifying clarity. I did not turn the key in the ignition. I did not turn on the heat. I simply pulled my work tablet from my briefcase, connected it to my cellular hotspot, and went to war. As a risk auditor, I spend my days tracking corporate anomalies, exposing hidden liabilities, and dismantling financial smokescreens. Finding the paper trail of a clumsy regional credit union loan was child play. I bypassed the consumer application portals and accessed the public county property records database. It took less than 4 minutes to locate the lien filed against my downtown penthouse. I paid the minor administrative fee and downloaded the fully executed loan agreement. The bright screen illuminated the dark cabin of my car, casting a harsh blue light across my face. I stared at the multi-page document. $150,000. The terms were predatory. The interest rate was exorbitant. But the most damning piece of evidence sat at the very bottom of the final page. I scrolled down to the authorization section. There it was. My signature. It was not a forged scrawl or a clumsy imitation. It was my exact legitimate digital signature, complete with a verified cryptographic timestamp. I stared at the loops and angles of my own handwriting. My brain raced backward, flipping through my calendar, cross-referencing every single document I had authorized over the past year. I never signed anything for a credit union. I never authorized a mortgage specialist. Then the memory struck me with the physical force of a punch to the gut. 3 months ago. Late August. It was a Sunday morning, and I had been working on a complex audit report when the lobby concierge buzzed my apartment. My father Richard had shown up completely unannounced, carrying 2 cups of artisan coffee and a box of pastries. It was an unusually warm gesture from a man who normally only called when he needed a favor. He had sat on my expensive velvet sofa looking tired, rubbing his temples and playing the role of a stressed, aging patriarch trying to secure his family future. "I am updating the family trust, Caroline," he had said, his voice heavy with manufactured exhaustion. "The tax laws are changing next year, and my accountant says we need to restructure the household deductions to avoid a massive penalty. Since you are still legally listed as a dependent on the old family estate structure, I need your signature to uncouple your tax bracket from ours. It will actually help your credit in the long run." He had pulled an electronic signing pad from his briefcase. The screen had displayed a generic-looking tax authorization form. I had asked to read the full document, but he had checked his watch, acting rushed and irritated. "It is just standard tax boilerplate, Caroline. Do you really think I have time to sit here while you audit your own father? Malik and Stephanie are waiting for me at the dealership. Just sign the line so I can get this to the accountant before the weekend is over. I had felt that familiar pang of guilt, the conditioned reflex of a daughter trained to constantly seek her father's approval. I did not want to be the difficult one. I did not want to cause another argument. So I took the stylus and signed my name on the glowing digital line. Sitting in my freezing car 3 months later, looking at the fraudulent home equity loan, I realized exactly what had happened. He had not shown me a tax document. He had buried the loan authorization under a digital cover page, or simply mapped the signature capture directly to the credit union application. The man who raised me, the man I spent my entire life trying to make proud, had walked into my home, looked me dead in the eyes, and weaponized my trust to steal my equity. The air inside the car suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I rolled down the window, gasping for the icy winter air. This was not just financial manipulation. This was not just another instance of my parents favoring my sister and bailing out her grifter husband. This was a calculated, premeditated federal crime. They committed identity theft. They committed wire fraud. They orchestrated a coordinated scheme to illegally encumber my property and siphon off $150,000 to fund Malik Luxury Lifestyle and Stephanie Real Estate Vanity Project. And they did it knowing full well that if I defaulted my home, the only safe space I had ever known would be seized by the bank. I closed my eyes. The image of them sitting in that French restaurant flashed behind my eyelids. The caviar, the vintage wine, Malik polishing his solid gold Rolex, Stephanie complaining about me being stingy, my mother screaming that I was an empty, heartless woman who did not know how to love. They had sat there eating a feast I paid for acting morally superior while sitting on a pile of stolen cash ripped directly from my future. For 33 years I had cried over their rejection. I had spent countless nights wondering why I was never pretty enough, smart enough, or charming enough to earn their love. I had blamed myself for the distance between us. I had bought into their narrative that I was cold and broken. But as I opened my eyes, staring at the irrefutable proof of their absolute moral bankruptcy, the last lingering thread of daughterly affection snapped. The desperate inner child begging for a scrap of parental validation died instantly. In her place, a cold, calculating professional was born. They did not see me as family. They saw me as collateral. They thought my success was their personal piggy bank. They thought they could execute a sloppy, illegal financial maneuver and hide behind the shield of family loyalty to avoid the consequences. They assumed I would be too scared of losing them to ever fight back. They assumed wrong. I reached out and locked my tablet. I did not shed a single tear. I started the car, the engine roaring to life in the quiet street. I turned the heater on full blast, gripping the steering wheel as the warmth flooded the cabin. I was not going to call the police right now. A simple police report would just lead to a messy family dispute where my mother would cry and manipulate the narrative. No, they wanted to play high-stakes financial games with a risk auditor. I was going to give them a masterclass in total destruction. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person who possessed a mind as ruthless as mine. My phone connected to the car audio system, ringing twice before a deep voice answered. "Jonathan?" I said, my tone completely devoid of emotion. "I need your legal expertise immediately. My family just crossed a line into federal territory, and I need to draft an execution strategy before Thanksgiving." The lawyer on the other end chuckled a dark, knowing sound. "I will meet you at the office in 20 minutes, Caroline. Bring everything." I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the restaurant and the illusion of my family behind forever. Jonathan poured 2 glasses of black coffee as I walked into his corner office, overlooking the freezing Chicago skyline. The clock on his wall read midnight. He wore a rumpled dress shirt, his tie discarded on a leather chair. Jonathan was a former federal prosecutor who transitioned to private practice, focusing exclusively on white-collar crime and complex financial litigation. We had collaborated on several corporate audits in the past. He knew my meticulous nature. He knew I did not make late-night emergency calls unless a financial bomb had just detonated. I opened my briefcase and spread the downloaded county property records across his massive glass desk. I did not cry. I did not shake. I simply pointed to the final page of the loan agreement. Look at the authorization block, I instructed, my voice echoing coldly in the empty office. That is a fully executed home equity loan for $150,000. It is secured against my downtown penthouse. Jonathan leaned over, adjusting his glasses. He scanned the document, his eyes narrowing as he took in the predatory interest rate and the obscure lending institution. He tapped the screen where my digital signature sat perfectly replicated. "You did not sign this," he stated. It was a fact, not a question. "My father came to my apartment 3 months ago," I explained, pulling up my personal calendar on my tablet to show the exact date and time. "He claimed he needed my signature on a digital pad to sever my tax dependency from the family estate. He rushed me. He said Malik and Stephanie were waiting. He mapped the signature capture software directly to this credit union application." Jonathan let out a low whistle, rubbing his jaw. "This is not a simple forgery, Caroline. This is aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. If he crossed state lines digitally, it triggers federal jurisdiction. We can call the authorities right now and have him arrested by morning." I shook my head, taking a slow sip of the bitter coffee. "No. If we call the police right now, my mother will hire a defense attorney and spin a sob story about a confused old man making a clerical error. Stephanie will cry on social media about her cruel sister destroying the family. They will drag this out in civil court for years, claiming I gave verbal consent. I need to know exactly where every single dollar went. I need the bulletproof paper trail." I opened my audit software, bypassing the standard consumer interfaces and digging straight into the clearinghouse routing numbers attached to the loan disbursement. As a risk auditor, tracking hidden assets was my specialty. Jonathan sat beside me, pulling up the corresponding state registry databases on his dual monitors. We worked in absolute silence for 45 minutes. The rhythmic clicking of my keyboard was the only sound in the room. I traced the initial wire transfer from the regional credit union. The money had not gone into a standard checking account. My father was too cunning for that. "Got it," I said, stopping my cursor over a newly formed financial entity. Jonathan leaned in, analyzing the routing data. "A revocable living trust," he noted, reading the registration details. "The Richard and Barbara Family Legacy Trust, established just 4 days before the loan was funded. He is listed as the sole managing trustee. He funneled the stolen equity directly into a legally shielded entity to wash the funds." I felt a fresh wave of disgust wash over me. He named the vehicle used to steal from me a legacy trust. The sheer arrogance was staggering. But I did not let the anger distract me. I kept digging, following the digital breadcrumbs as the money flowed out of the trust account. There were exactly 2 major disbursements. I pulled up the first transaction log. $85,000 was wired out 48 hours ago, I read aloud, tracing the recipient routing number. It went directly to an automotive group in the northern suburbs, the exact dealership that sells imported luxury SUVs. Malik, new Porsche Cayenne. Jonathan concluded, leaning back in his chair. "Your father stole your home equity to buy his unemployed son-in-law a luxury sports car." I nodded, pulling up the second transaction. "But wait, there is another $65,000. I traced the wire transfer to an escrow account managed by a premium real estate title company. Jonathan Cross referenced the title company name with the state property registry. He typed rapidly, his eyes scanning the returned results. "It is a down payment," he confirmed. "The title company is currently holding funds in escrow for a 5-bedroom property in Oak Brook. The buyers listed on the pending deed are Stephanie and Malik." I stared at the screen, the pieces of their sickening puzzle finally snapping together to form a complete picture. The lavish dinner tonight. Stephanie bragging about her beautiful life. Malik flashing his solid gold Rolex. My mother screaming that I was an empty vessel who did not understand family sacrifice. Every single bit of their manufactured success was built literally on the stolen foundation of my home. My father had committed a federal crime to buy Malik a Porsche and secure a mansion for Stephanie. They were playing rich using the money they had ripped out of my future. Jonathan closed his laptop, his expression grim. Caroline, this is an open and shut case of coordinated financial fraud. Your father is the architect, but Malik and Stephanie are the direct beneficiaries of stolen funds. The IRS and the FBI will have a field day with this. I can draft the criminal referral to the federal prosecutor tonight. We can have their accounts frozen by Monday. I looked at the glowing screens displaying their crimes. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have called the police immediately, but I was not normal anymore. They had murdered the daughter who loved them and left a ruthless auditor in her place. Do not file the referral yet, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Jonathan frowned, looking at me with concern. Caroline, if you wait, they might spend the rest of it. There is no rest of it, I replied. They drained the entire 150,000. But you and I both know Malik. He is a parasite. A parasite does not stop feeding when it finds a host who does not fight back. Tonight at the restaurant, they demanded I host Thanksgiving, and they demanded I fund Malik new fake logistics startup. Jonathan's eyes widened, realizing what I was implying. You think they will try to steal more? I know they will, I said, standing up and packing my tablet back into my briefcase. If we freeze their accounts now, my father goes to jail, but Malik and Stephanie get to play the innocent victims who knew nothing about the funding source. I want them all to fall. I want them to reach for more, and I want to be the one who slams the trap shut on their hands. I looked at Jonathan, my resolve completely solidified. Draft the paperwork for the FBI and the IRS, but hold it. I am going to pretend I know nothing. I am going to call my mother tomorrow and apologize. I am going to agree to host their pathetic Thanksgiving dinner. And I am going to let Malik bring me his fake business proposal. Jonathan smiled, a slow, predatory grin matching my energy. You are going to let them dig their own graves. Exactly, I said, walking toward the office door. They wanted to use my identity. I am going to let them use it until the federal government comes to collect the debt. Let them enjoy their new Porsche for a few days. Thanksgiving is next week, and I plan on serving them absolute ruin. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I had spent the hours before dawn setting up a secure digital recording system on my personal phone. Illinois is a two-party consent state for recordings, but federal law and the specific whistleblower statutes Jonathan and I were targeting gave us enough leverage to use recorded confessions in our impending federal fraud case. I needed my mother to admit to the crime. I needed her to say it out loud so there would be no shadow of a doubt when the indictments rained down on them. I poured a cup of black coffee and pressed the record button. I took a deep breath, letting the cold, analytical part of my brain take the driver's seat. Then I dialed my mother number. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice dripping with annoyed exhaustion. Caroline, it is barely 8 in the morning. What do you want? I am busy looking at floral arrangements for the new house. I kept my voice perfectly pitched, hovering between panic and betrayal. Mom, I just checked my credit report. Why is there a $150,000 home equity loan taken out against my penthouse? Why is my signature on a document I never authorized? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I waited for the panic. I waited for her to deny it or make up a lie about a bank error. I waited for the natural human reaction of a parent caught committing a federal crime against their own child. Instead, my mother let out a loud, irritated sigh. Oh, for heaven's sake, Caroline. You are the older sister and you are calling me at this hour to count every single penny. You are being completely dramatic. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter. Dramatic. Mom, you and Dad stole my identity. You took out a massive mortgage on my home. We did not steal anything, my mother shrieked, her voice echoing sharply through the phone speaker. Your father just borrowed your identity temporarily to save the family honor. Malik was about to lose face with his new investment group, He needed a luxury vehicle to look the part of a successful broker. Stephanie needed a down payment for a house that reflects her social standing. Your father did what any good patriarch would do. He protected the family image. Protected the family image by committing mortgage fraud, I asked, making sure my tone sounded suitably horrified while the recording software captured every single damning admission. You are so obsessed with the rules, my mother sneered. This is why you are 33 and completely alone. You live by yourself in that massive, expensive apartment. You have no husband. You have no children. You have absolutely no real responsibilities. What do you even need a high credit score for? It is just sitting there doing nothing while your sister is out here trying to build a real life. We put that equity to good use. I closed my eyes, letting the sheer toxicity of her words wash over me. She was not just justifying a felony. She was weaponizing my independence against me. In her twisted mind, my lack of a husband made my property public domain for the family to pillage. So you think because I am single and focused on my career, my home belongs to Malik? I asked, keeping her talking. Malik is actually trying to build an empire, she snapped back. He has vision, something you clearly lack. You just sit in a cubicle auditing other people's money. Malik is out there making deals. The banks are biased against him, so your father stepped in to level the playing field. We transferred the funds into a family trust because we knew you would be exactly like this. Selfish, calculating, unwilling to help your own flesh and blood. You should be thanking your father for including you in Stephanie's future success. Thanking him for identity theft. Stop calling it that, my mother yelled. It is family business. We are a family and we share our resources. If you had just agreed to give Malik the money when he asked months ago, your father would not have had to go through the trouble of restructuring your tax documents to get the loan approved. You forced his hand, Caroline. You made him do this because you are so stingy. The gaslighting was magnificent. She had completely flipped the narrative. According to Barbara, the victim of identity theft was the actual villain, and the perpetrators were just loving parents forced into a corner by a selfish daughter. It was textbook psychological manipulation. If I were still the desperate girl seeking their approval, this conversation would have broken me. I would have internalized the guilt. I would have believed that my financial boundaries were a moral failure. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a risk auditor collecting a verbal confession. So what is the plan, Mom? I asked, letting my voice waver slightly, feigning defeat. You take out a loan in my name, and who pays the monthly installments? The bank will foreclose on my home if the payments are not made. Malik will pay it back once his new tech logistics firm gets off the ground, she said dismissively, as if she were discussing a $10 grocery bill. Which brings me to why we met last night. Malik needs that $300,000 business loan to secure the inventory. Since your credit took a slight hit from the mortgage, your father says you will need to use your corporate guarantor status to co-sign his application. The sheer boundless greed left me speechless for a fraction of a second. They had already stolen $150,000 and plummeted my credit score. Now they wanted me to leverage my professional license to steal $300,000 more. And if I do not, I asked softly. If you do not, then you can forget about seeing us at Thanksgiving, my mother threatened, her voice turning icy and cruel. You can sit alone in your empty apartment with your perfect accounting spreadsheets and wonder why nobody loves you. But if you want to be part of this family, you will host Thanksgiving dinner. You will welcome Malik business partners, and you will sign the business loan papers when he brings them to your office. That is the only way we will forgive your disrespectful behavior. I let a heavy silence stretch across the line. I needed her to believe she had won. I needed her to feel the absolute rush of triumph so she would walk blindly into the slaughterhouse I was building. Okay, Mom, I whispered, letting out a defeated breath. I will do it. I will host Thanksgiving. Have Malik bring the paperwork to my office tomorrow. I will sign whatever he needs. My mother let out a satisfied hum. I knew you would see reason, Caroline. See? Was that so hard? Just learn to be a team player. We will arrive at your penthouse at 4 on Thursday. Make sure the turkey is organic. Malik does not eat processed meat. She hung up the phone without another word. I stared at the dark screen. The recording app showed 12 minutes of crystal clear, high-definition audio. It was a flawless confession. She had admitted to the loan, the forged tax documents, the trust fund transfer, and the coercion. I saved the audio file, encrypting it, and immediately backing it up to 3 separate secure cloud servers. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the bustling city of Chicago below. My mother thought she had just successfully bullied her spinster daughter into submission. She thought she had secured another massive payday for her golden child. She had no idea that she had just handed me the final nail for her own coffin. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. I was going to give them the most memorable Thanksgiving dinner in the history of our family. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving brought an eerie calm to my downtown office. I sat at my mahogany desk, surrounded by towering stacks of risk assessment portfolios. For the past 48 hours, I had functioned purely as a machine. I had placed hard security freezes with all major credit bureaus. I had rerouted my legitimate direct deposits to a secure offshore account Jonathan had helped me establish. My emotional detachment was absolute. The woman who once cried over her family rejecting her had been completely replaced by a corporate auditor preparing a fatal compliance report. My smartphone rested on the wireless charging pad next to my monitor. It vibrated twice, sliding an inch across the glass surface. I glanced down. A notification popped up from the group chat Stephanie had created months ago. She had named the chat Family First, which was a sickeningly ironic title, considering how they treated me. Usually, the chat was a dumping ground for Stephanie posting endless selfies in her new Oakbrook mansion, or my mother sharing links to expensive vacation packages she expected my father to buy. Today, however, the notification was different. It was an audio message sent by Malik. I frowned, picking up the device. Malik rarely communicated in the family chat, unless he was posting a picture of his latest luxury purchase to subtly demand praise. An unprompted voice memo was highly unusual. I slipped my noise-canceling earbuds into my ears and tapped the play button, leaning back in my ergonomic desk chair. The audio was slightly muffled at first, filled with the heavy bass of hip-hop music and the distinct roaring engine of his stolen Porsche Cayenne. Then Malik's voice boomed through the speakers, loud, arrogant, and completely unfiltered. He was not addressing the family. He was leaving a message for one of his fraudulent business partners. "Yeah, man, the new ride handles like an absolute dream," Malik bragged over the engine noise. "Tell the guys to get the warehouse lease ready. We are good to go for the launch, and do not worry about the funding. We have the ultimate cash cow lined up." I stopped breathing, my finger hovering over the screen. Malik continued, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Just force that old spinster sister to host the turkey dinner on Thursday. She is completely pathetic and easy to bend. All her mother has to do is yell a little and she folds like wet paper. Richard already has her perfectly on the hook. She agreed to everything this morning. Next month, my father-in-law said we will just use the rest of her social security number to leverage another massive line of credit for the logistics company. We are talking $500,000 easily. She will not even notice until we are millionaires, and we can just toss her a few grand to keep her quiet. She is just a sad, lonely woman anyway. Her credit is doing better with us using it." The recording ended with the sharp sound of a sports car accelerating. I sat frozen in the silence of my office. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. Instead, a profound, chilling clarity washed over my entire body. Malik had pressed the wrong contact name while driving. He had sent his brazen criminal confession directly into the family group chat. 3 seconds later, the message vanished from the screen. A small notification replaced it, stating that the sender had deleted the audio file. Malik must have glanced down at his phone at a stoplight, realized his catastrophic blunder, and scrambled to erase the evidence before anyone could hear it. He probably thought he had dodged a massive bullet. He probably wiped the sweat from his forehead and told himself he deleted it fast enough. He was wrong. What Malik, the fake tech entrepreneur, did not understand was that I work in digital risk compliance. 6 months ago, I installed a background archiving application on my phone to automatically download and locally encrypt all incoming media files for compliance tracking. The moment his audio message hit my device, it was permanently captured, saved to my local hard drive, and automatically synced to my secure cloud server. Deleting it from the chat app did absolutely nothing. I opened my encrypted vault folder, and there it was. A pristine high-definition audio file containing a federal confession. I played it again, letting the sheer arrogance of his words sink into my brain. The parasite was not just feeding on me. He was laughing at me while he did it. He viewed my single status and my professional dedication as an open invitation to exploit my identity. Worse, my own father had explicitly promised him unfettered access to my social security number for future fraud. They were not planning to stop at the home equity loan. They were planning to bleed me completely dry, bankrupt my future, and then toss me a few $1,000s like a beggar on the street. I pulled up my messaging application and looked at the family group chat. The deleted message bubble sat there mocking him. If I were a normal sister, I would have immediately sent a text confronting him. I would have demanded answers. I would have called my parents and screamed at them for plotting to use my social security number again. But warning a parasite that you have discovered its presence only gives it time to flee. I typed a response into the group chat, keeping my syntax light casual and completely oblivious. Did someone delete a message I typed adding a smiley face emoji? I was in a meeting and missed it. By the way, I just finalized the Thanksgiving menu. I ordered the organic free-range turkey Malik requested and the vintage wine Mom loves. I cannot wait to host everyone on Thursday. It is going to be a holiday we will never forget. I hit send and tossed the phone onto my desk. I leaned back and looked out the window at the gray Chicago sky. Malik thought I was an easy target. My parents thought I was a desperate, lonely woman begging for their approval. They had no idea that the table had already turned. The trap was set, the bait was laid, and the parasites were marching willingly straight into the slaughterhouse. My phone screen lit up almost immediately. The replies poured into the family group chat, painting a pathetic portrait of their collective relief. Stephanie was the first to respond, sending a barrage of heart emojis, and a message that read, she was so excited for the organic turkey. My mother followed shortly after, praising my renewed sense of family duty. She added a condescending note telling me that hosting this dinner was exactly what I needed to break out of my selfish habits. Malik remained completely silent in the group chat. He was likely still sweating from his near-fatal blunder, convincing himself that his swift deletion had saved him from federal prison. I sat at my desk and watched their arrogant messages scroll past my vision. They genuinely believed I was entirely oblivious. They believed their psychological manipulation had successfully broken my spirit, securing their free ride for the foreseeable future. I did not waste another second. I locked my office door and transferred the encrypted audio file containing Malik and his brazen confession onto a secure flash drive. I gathered the printed logs showing the exact timestamp of the message delivery and the subsequent deletion command. I grabbed my wool coat and left the corporate building, stepping back into the biting Chicago wind. The drive to Jonathan and his law firm felt remarkably different this time. The crushing weight of familial betrayal had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the sharp adrenaline of a predator tracking its prey. Jonathan was waiting for me in his conference room. He had already laid out the preliminary drafts of the criminal referral we had discussed the night before. I placed the silver flash drive on the center of his glass table. I did not bother with greetings. I told him to plug it in and listen. Jonathan inserted the drive into his laptop and clicked the audio file. Malik and his booming voice filled the quiet room, bragging over the roar of his stolen Porsche. He detailed how easily they manipulated me and explicitly outlined my father and his plan to steal another $500,000 using my social security number. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands together. A slow, dark smile spread across his face. He looked at me with absolute professional respect. "This changes everything, Caroline. This is not just a retroactive investigation anymore. This is active ongoing conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. Malik just handed us the intent, the method, and the timeline on a silver platter. They are planning to strike again. I nodded, pacing the length of the conference room. I told Jonathan about my response in the group chat. I told him I promised them an unprecedented big surprise for Thanksgiving. They think I yielded, I explained, my voice devoid of any warmth. They think I am preparing a feast for Malik and his shady business partners. But I want to give them exactly what they asked for. I want Malik to bring that fraudulent business loan application straight to my penthouse. I want him to physically hand me the paperwork tying my corporate guarantor status to his fake logistics firm. Jonathan caught my drift immediately. You want them to commit the overt act. If they physically present you with fraudulent loan documents attempting to secure $300,000 under false pretenses while sitting in your home, it elevates the entire case. It locks them into an undeniable sequence of federal crimes. I will draft the exact statutes we are hitting them with. We are going to build a legal net so tight they will not be able to breathe, let alone escape. I pulled out my phone right there in the conference room. It was time to set the bait. I opened a direct message to Malik, bypassing the group chat. I needed to stroke his massive, fragile ego. I typed, carefully crafting the perfect illusion of a supportive sister-in-law. Hey Malik, I wrote. I have been thinking a lot about our dinner conversation. You are right about the market opportunities. I want to help you build this empire. Bring the business loan paperwork to Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday. I will review it and sign as your corporate guarantor before we serve the turkey. Let us make this a true family partnership. I hit send and showed the screen to Jonathan. We waited in tense silence. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Malik replied with lightning speed. His greed had completely overridden whatever lingering caution he might have possessed regarding his deleted voice memo. Sounds great, Caroline, he typed back, adding a handshake emoji. I will bring the full portfolio. Glad you finally see the vision. I locked the screen and placed the phone back in my purse. The trap was officially primed. Jonathan stood up and began writing rapidly on his whiteboard. We mapped out the next 4 days with military precision. We would not just hand this over to the local police. Local authorities might drag their feet or treat it as a civil domestic dispute. We needed the heavy artillery. We needed the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I spent the rest of the evening at the law firm helping Jonathan compile the digital dossiers. We cataloged every lie, every fraudulent transfer, and every abusive message. The sheer volume of their deception was staggering, but my hands never trembled. I felt a profound sense of liberation. For my entire life, I had been chained to their expectations, suffocating under the weight of their conditional love. My mother had always demanded perfection while treating me like dirt. My father had demanded submission while stealing my future. Stephanie had demanded the spotlight while contributing absolutely nothing to the world. They had all worked together to keep me small so they could feel big. But their fatal mistake was underestimating the very skills they forced me to develop. They pushed me into a grueling corporate career because they wanted a successful daughter to brag about. They forced me to become a meticulous auditor of risk. And now I was applying every single ounce of that professional training to audit my own family. The discrepancy in their moral ledger was terminal. The debt was about to be collected in full. I left Jonathan in his office late that night, the cold wind feeling like a promise of the storm to come. The countdown to Thanksgiving had officially begun. The corporate headquarters of my firm occupied the top 15 floors of a sleek glass tower in the financial district. It was a place of high-stakes, hushed voices and intense scrutiny. It was not a place for amateurs. Yet at precisely 10 in the morning on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the receptionist buzzed my desk to announce I had a visitor. Malik had arrived. I had anticipated this exact maneuver, so I had already instructed security to send him straight up. I wanted him to feel the intimidating weight of a legitimate corporate environment. I wanted his fragile ego to inflate defensively, ensuring he would make careless mistakes. I stood by the window overlooking the city when my office door swung open. Malik strode in carrying a designer leather briefcase that I knew for a fact was purchased using the stolen equity from my penthouse. He wore a flashy, double-breasted suit that screamed nouveau riche paired with the same heavy gold Rolex he had flaunted at the French restaurant. He walked with the exaggerated swagger of a man who believed he was conquering the world while completely blind to the fact that he was stepping onto a landmine. "Nice setup you have here, Caroline," he said, tossing his briefcase onto my pristine mahogany desk. "A bit stiff for my taste, but it pays the bills, right? I am more of a disruptive workspace kind of guy. Creative energy flowing. You know how it is in the startup world." I did not point out that his startup world consisted entirely of bankruptcies and unpaid vendors. I simply smiled, gesturing for him to take a seat in the leather guest chair. I offered him a cup of coffee, which he declined with a wave of his hand. He was too eager to get to the main event. "I am glad you finally saw the big picture," he began, leaning forward and popping the latches on his briefcase. "Your father and I had a long talk after dinner last night. He is thrilled that you are finally stepping up to support the family legacy. Stephanie has been stressing over the launch timeline, but I told her not to worry because her big sister was going to provide the final piece of the puzzle." He pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in a glossy black folder and slid it across the desk toward me. The title page featured a generic pixelated logo for a company called Apex Global Logistics. It looked like something a high school student had designed in 5 minutes. "This is the expansion blueprint," Malik declared, tapping the folder with a manicured finger. "We are securing a small business administration loan for $300,000. The market is ripe for a hostile takeover, and I have the fleet contracts ready to sign. I just need capital to lease the warehouse space and purchase the initial routing software. The federal backing makes it practically risk-free." I opened the folder and let my eyes scan the first few pages. It took every ounce of my professional discipline to keep my face completely neutral. The paperwork was an absolute disaster. The business address listed for the corporate headquarters was a UPS store mailbox in a strip mall. The revenue projections were astronomically inflated, citing non-existent market shares and phantom vendor agreements. There was no collateral listed, no operational history, and zero actual assets. It was a textbook shell company designed solely to extract cash and vanish. But the most audacious part was the guarantor section on the final page. "I see you left the primary guarantor block empty," I noted, looking up at him. Malik leaned back, crossing his arms with a smug grin. "That is where you come in, Caroline. The banks are run by dinosaurs. They see a visionary like me and they get scared of the risk. They want a safe, boring corporate backing. Your father and I agreed that you need to list your official title as a senior risk auditor on the application. You will sign as the corporate guarantor, using your pristine financial credentials and your firm affiliation to rubber stamp the approval. The loan officer will see your background and fast-track the $300,000 directly into my operating account by Friday morning." I kept my hands perfectly still on top of the desk. "You want me to leverage my professional license and my position at this firm to personally guarantee a federal loan for your startup?" My phone suddenly buzzed on the desk. The caller ID showed my father, Richard. Malik gestured toward the screen. "Answer it. He wants to make sure we are all on the same page." I tapped the speakerphone button. "Hello, Dad." "Caroline." My father's voice boomed through the quiet office, carrying that familiar tone of demanding authority. "Malik tells me he is at your office with the paperwork. I expect you to handle this without any of your usual dramatic hesitation. He needs that capital transferred before the holiday weekend so he can lock down the warehouse lease. You will put your corporate title on that line and secure the family investment. Do we have an understanding?" They were truly extraordinary in their boundless greed. My father had already stolen $150,000 from my home equity, and now he was aggressively bullying me into committing federal bank fraud to secure another $300,000. He was willing to risk my career, my freedom, and my professional license just to keep his son-in-law happy and maintain the illusion of his own wealth. I looked at Malik, who was grinning at me, waiting for my submission. I looked at the fraudulent documents sitting on my desk. They thought they were brilliant operators outsmarting the system. They had no idea they had just delivered the ultimate piece of physical evidence straight into the hands of an auditor who was actively working with a federal prosecutor. "I understand completely, Dad," I said, infusing my voice with a perfect blend of reluctance and obedience. "I am reviewing the documents right now. The numbers are certainly ambitious." "Do not overthink the numbers, Caroline," my father snapped. "Just sign the guarantor page and bring the finalized packet to Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. Malik needs to upload the scanned copies to the portal by midnight Thursday. Do not disappoint us again." He ended the call abruptly, leaving the dial tone echoing in the room. Malik stood up, buttoning his flashy suit jacket. He looked down at me with an expression of supreme victory. He genuinely believed he had just conquered me. "See you tomorrow for the turkey dinner, sis," Malik said, offering a mocking salute. "Have that signature ready. The logistics market waits for no one." He turned and walked out of my office, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind him. I sat in the silence, staring at the glossy black folder. He had actually done it. He had physically transported fraudulent federal loan documents across city lines and explicitly demanded my participation in a conspiracy to defraud the Small Business Administration. I reached for my desk phone and dialed Jonathan. The trap was no longer just set. The prey had confidently walked inside, locked the cage from the inside, and handed me the key. I told Jonathan to contact his associates at the Federal Bureau. The fantasy was over, and the absolute nightmare was about to begin. I watched the heavy glass door swing shut behind Malik before turning my complete attention back to the glossy black folder resting on my mahogany desk. I had promised my father I would review the documents, and I intended to keep that promise with microscopic precision. I walked over to my office door, locking the deadbolt with a solid metallic click. I turned off my standard desk phone, disconnected my workstation from the primary corporate network, and booted up my encrypted secondary laptop. This specific machine bypassed our standard company servers, connecting directly to a secure virtual private network I utilized for highly sensitive corporate fraud investigations. I opened the black folder and began extracting the raw data points from Malik and his business application. The first red flag was glaringly obvious. The employer identification number listed for Apex Global Logistics was registered with the state only 3 weeks ago. Yet the attached financial statements printed on premium paper claimed robust operational revenue dating back 2 full years. They were incredibly sloppy. I cross-referenced the business address listed on the cover page using a satellite mapping tool. As I suspected, it was merely a virtual mailbox located behind a dilapidated strip mall dry cleaner in the suburbs. There were no operational warehouses. There was no fleet of delivery trucks. There was absolutely nothing but empty promises printed on heavy cardstock to create an illusion of corporate success. But sloppy criminals always leave digital footprints, and I was a master at following them through the dark corners of the financial system. I pulled up the state corporate registry portal and ran a deep background search on the entity name. The official registration documents listed my father Richard as the primary registered agent and Malik as the chief executive officer. That was entirely expected. What made the blood freeze in my veins was the secondary corporate officer listed on the state charter. My own name, Caroline, listed officially as the chief financial officer of Apex Global Logistics. I typed my social security number into the federal database query tool, my fingers striking the keys with mechanical precision. The search results cascaded down my high-definition monitor, revealing a financial horror story that went far beyond a simple $300,000 business loan application. The Small Business Administration loan Malik brought to my office today was merely the newest chapter in their ongoing criminal enterprise. They had already been incredibly busy behind my back. I stared at the federal loan disbursement records glowing on my screen. Last year, at the height of the government economic relief efforts, Malik and my father had successfully applied for and received a Paycheck Protection Program loan. The total amount was a staggering $250,000. The application claimed Apex Global Logistics employed 42 full-time warehouse workers who desperately needed their wages protected during the economic downturn. I audited the attached payroll manifest line by line. The employee names were completely fabricated. They used slight variations of our extended family members' names, generated fake residential addresses, and attached expertly forged tax forms to validate the phantom workforce. And the entire application, the sworn legal certification that these documents were real and accurate under penalty of perjury, was signed using my electronic signature and my social security number. They had stolen federal relief funds meant for genuinely struggling businesses, and they had pinned the absolute legal liability directly onto my chest. If the government ever audited that relief loan, I would be the one facing a federal indictment for defrauding the United States Treasury. My parents and Malik would simply claim I was the rogue financial officer who managed the books without their direct oversight. My hands flew across the keyboard, pulling the historical tax filings associated with the Richard and Barbara Family Legacy Trust. I needed to see exactly where that $250,000 of phantom payroll went after the government cleared the wire transfer. The money had been funneled straight into the trust account. From there, my father had dispersed it to Malik to fund his previous failed lifestyle choices and to pay the massive capital gains taxes my parents owed on a separate real estate property sale. They were engaging in textbook federal tax evasion. They were washing stolen federal funds through a fake shell company, passing it into a shielded family trust, and using it to illegally offset their personal tax liabilities. It was a beautiful, intricate web of financial felonies that spanned multiple federal jurisdictions. They thought they were completely untouchable because they had a professional risk auditor unknowingly acting as their human shield. They believed my pristine financial record and corporate title would deflect any automated federal scrutiny from the Revenue Service. They had literally built a financial guillotine, placed my neck inside it, and were actively holding the rope while demanding I thank them for the privilege. I slowly closed the laptop screen, the soft click echoing in the quiet office. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was no longer just hurtful or disappointing. It was awe-inspiring in its absolute depravity. They were not just bad parents or greedy relatives demanding a free ride. They were a sophisticated criminal syndicate operating under the guise of an upper-middle-class suburban family. They smiled at country club dinners while forging federal documents in their home office. I packed the fraudulent black folder into my briefcase alongside my encrypted drive. The game of playing the obedient daughter was officially over. I was going to call Jonathan and initiate the final phase of the legal operation. Tomorrow at Thanksgiving dinner, I was going to burn their entire criminal syndicate to the ground and watch them choke on the ashes. I arrived at Jonathan and his downtown firm precisely at 2 p.m. He had bypassed his usual receptionist waiting for me personally at the frosted glass doors of his private conference room. Inside sat 2 individuals who did not wear the expensive tailored suits typical of corporate lawyers. They wore the unremarkable, sensible clothing of federal law enforcement. Jonathan locked the heavy doors behind me and made the formal introductions. On the left sat Special Agent Harrison from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specializing in aggravated identity theft and coordinated wire fraud. Next to him sat Special Agent Miller, representing the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. They had already reviewed the preliminary digital dossier Jonathan transmitted earlier that morning. They knew the basics about the fraudulent home equity loan and the amateur shell company, but they did not know the absolute goldmine I was about to drop onto the center of their glass table. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the encrypted drive along with the printed physical evidence Malik had arrogantly delivered to my desk just hours prior. I slid the glossy black folder directly toward Agent Miller. I bypassed the standard pleasantries and went straight to the hard numbers. I explained exactly how my father Richard and his son-in-law Malik had successfully secured $250,000 in Paycheck Protection Program relief funds using a completely phantom workforce. I walked the federal agents through the forged tax forms, the fake employee residential addresses, and the routing numbers funneling the stolen government cash straight into the Richard and Barbara Family Legacy Trust. I showed them the subsequent disbursements used to illegally offset personal capital gains taxes and fund a luxury lifestyle. Agent Miller leaned forward, his eyes sharpening as he reviewed the meticulously organized ledgers. Defrauding a regional credit union was certainly a severe crime, but stealing federal relief funds and actively evading the Internal Revenue Service elevated this conspiracy to a top-tier federal priority. Then, I executed my ultimate financial maneuver. I pulled a specific pre-filled document from my leather folder and placed it squarely in front of Agent Miller. It was an official Internal Revenue Service Form 211, the application for award for original information. I was not just handing them a massive criminal case out of a sense of civic duty or moral outrage. I was officially registering myself as an IRS whistleblower. Under federal tax law, an individual who provides actionable intelligence leading to the successful collection of unpaid taxes and massive penalties is legally entitled to a mandatory percentage of the recovered funds, often up to 30%. My parents and Malik had stolen my home equity, ruined my pristine credit score, and weaponized my professional identity to enrich themselves. I was going to let the federal government step in and seize every single asset they owned. Their bank accounts, their luxury vehicles, their properties would all be liquidated to pay their federal restitution. And then the United States Treasury was going to write me a massive reward check for exposing the entire operation. Agent Miller looked at the whistleblower form, then up at me. A rare flash of profound respect crossed his stoic face as he signed his official acknowledgement on the spot. With the financial destruction legally secured, I turned my complete attention to Agent Harrison. I handed him the secure flash drive containing the audio file Malik had so foolishly sent to the family group chat. I provided the irrefutable digital footprints, proving I was not the authorized signer on any of the corporate documents or the residential mortgage. I gave him the geolocation data, proving I was at my corporate office when the loan documents were allegedly signed at my father and his suburban home. Harrison confirmed the evidence was overwhelming. They possessed more than enough probable cause to secure immediate federal warrants for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The federal machinery was officially roaring to life. I had only one specific operational request for the agents in the room. I needed the asset freezes and the initial warrants to execute perfectly in sync with the upcoming holiday. I explained my upcoming dinner arrangements. I detailed the impending gathering of the entire criminal syndicate in my downtown penthouse, and the final business loan document Malik actively expected me to sign before the meal. If the authorities raided their suburban homes today, Malik and Stephanie would have time to play the victims on social media. My mother would have time to craft a false narrative. I wanted them all trapped in one room, completely isolated from their enablers. When the reality of their situation crashed down upon them, I was going to serve them their absolute ruin alongside the roasted turkey. The federal agents exchanged a brief, calculated look with Jonathan. Working with a cooperative, highly organized insider made their jobs exponentially easier. Agent Harrison agreed to coordinate the financial lockdown perfectly with my requested timeline. The banks would receive the federal freeze orders late Thursday afternoon, ensuring that zero funds could be moved out of any accounts over the long holiday weekend. The arrest warrants would be processed and ready for execution. I shook hands with the agents and walked out of the conference room feeling a powerful surge of pure adrenaline. The trap was now fully constructed, loaded with devastating federal ammunition and perfectly concealed. I had legally weaponized the full might of the United States government against the people who thought I was nothing more than a convenient victim. I drove back to my penthouse and began preparing the dining room for my guests. I polished the silverware, arranged the crystal glasses, and ordered the most expensive organic turkey money could buy. They wanted a lavish holiday feast to celebrate their impending wealth. I was going to make absolutely certain it was a meal they would remember for the rest of their miserable lives. Wednesday night passed with a chilling absolute quiet. Behind the impenetrable firewalls of federal databases, the United States government was actively dismantling my family illusion of wealth. Agent Miller and his specialized team at the Internal Revenue Service had placed silent tracking markers on every single financial node connected to the Richard and Barbara Family Legacy Trust. They monitored the routing numbers linked to my father and his primary checking accounts. They flagged the luxury dealership where Malik had purchased his imported Porsche. Agent Harrison from the Federal Bureau of Investigation mapped the illicit wire transfers that had illegally drained my home equity. Warrants were being meticulously drafted. Subpoenas were being signed by federal judges in closed chambers. The bureaucratic machinery of the justice system operates slowly until it targets a massive tax evasion and relief fraud conspiracy. Then it moves with the terrifying, unstoppable speed of a falling guillotine. My parents and Malik went to sleep that night, dreaming of the empire they were building. They had no idea that federal agents were already calculating the liquidation value of their entire lives. But handing them over to the federal government was only the first phase of my execution strategy. The federal agents would take their freedom, and the Revenue Service would take their stolen cash. I wanted to take something far more personal. I wanted to take the physical manifestation of Stephanie and her boundless arrogance. I wanted her pristine suburban mansion. Earlier that week, when Jonathan and I had audited the fraudulent wire transfers, we discovered that the $65,000 stolen from my penthouse was wired to a premium title company. It was utilized as a down payment for a massive 5-bedroom estate in the affluent neighborhood of Oak Brook. But Malik was a serial bankrupt with a horrific financial history. Traditional mortgage lenders would never underwrite a $1 million property for a man with 3 failed businesses and a credit score lower than room temperature. He had to have used an alternative high-risk financing method. I dug into the county deed records, utilizing my corporate audit access, and found exactly what I was looking for. Malik had not secured a conventional 30-year mortgage. He had bypassed the strict federal underwriting standards by utilizing a notoriously aggressive private hard money lender. The lender had issued a high-interest short-term bridge loan secured directly by the property deed itself. It was an incredibly toxic financial instrument designed for wealthy house flippers, not residential buyers pretending to be tech moguls. The contract mandated exorbitant monthly interest payments and included a strict default acceleration clause. If the borrower engaged in any financial fraud, or if the initial down payment was sourced from illicit funds, the lender possessed the legal right to instantly call the entire note due and demand immediate possession of the property. I called Jonathan back before the sun rose on Wednesday morning. I instructed him to immediately incorporate an anonymous shell company in the state of Delaware. We named it Obsidian Asset Management Limited Liability Company. Delaware corporate privacy laws are absolute, ensuring that my name would never appear on any public registry connected to the entity. Once the shell company was legally established, I wired a substantial portion of my own legitimate untouched corporate bonuses into its operating account. I had spent years saving my income while my family called me a miser. Now that discipline was funding their destruction. Armed with a briefcase full of pristine capital and a completely anonymous corporate identity, Jonathan approached the private hard money lender holding the note on Stephanie and her mansion. Hard money lenders are highly risk-averse when it comes to federal investigations. Jonathan casually informed their chief financial officer that the borrower Malik was currently the primary target of an impending federal wire fraud and identity theft indictment. He provided just enough redacted proof to make the lender sweat. If the federal government seized Malik and his assets, the lender would be tied up in asset forfeiture litigation for years, trying to reclaim their money. The lender panicked exactly as I had calculated. Jonathan offered them an immediate, highly profitable exit strategy. Obsidian Asset Management would purchase the promissory note and the deed of trust for the Oakbrook property right then and there, paying pure cash to take the toxic asset off their hands. The lender agreed instantly, desperate to wash their hands of Malik and his impending federal nightmare. By noon, the transaction was fully executed and officially recorded with the county clerk. The original lender transferred all legal rights, privileges, and collection authorities directly to my anonymous shell company. The legal reality of what I had just accomplished was breathtaking. I did not just freeze their bank accounts. I had actively purchased the debt on the very roof over their heads. I was officially and legally their sole creditor. Stephanie and Malik were currently moving their expensive designer furniture into a mansion that I completely controlled. Furthermore, because Malik had fundamentally breached the loan covenants by utilizing stolen identity funds to secure the initial financing, the loan was already in technical default. Under the aggressive terms of the promissory note I possessed the absolute legal authority to bypass the standard lengthy foreclosure process. I had the power to execute an immediate notice of default and issue a direct eviction mandate. I held the legal right to throw my golden child sister and her parasitic husband out onto the freezing Chicago streets with absolutely zero warning. I printed the freshly executed deed of assignment and the official notice of default. I placed the crisp legal documents into a sleek red folder, setting it gently on the edge of my dining room table next to the expensive crystal wine glasses. My sister had spent the entire week mocking my single status, bragging about her wealthy husband, and posting photos of her lavish new life, built on my stolen identity. She had demanded I host a luxurious Thanksgiving dinner to cater to her fabricated social standing. I looked at the red folder and smiled. I was going to serve her the absolute finest meal of her life, and for dessert, I was going to legally render her homeless. The sun set early over the Chicago skyline, plunging my penthouse into a deep, quiet darkness. I preferred the soft amber glow of my single desk lamp, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. Tomorrow my own family expected to walk into my home, eat my food, and demand I sign away my professional license for another fraudulent loan. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the traffic crawl along the frozen city streets below. My smartphone vibrated against the marble kitchen island. The sharp buzzing sound shattered the absolute silence. I slowly picked up the device. A social media notification flashed on the locked screen. Stephanie had just published a new post. I tapped the notification, allowing the application to load. A high-definition photograph filled my screen. Stephanie was standing in the grand foyer of her new Oakbrook mansion. She wore a designer cashmere sweater and held a crystal champagne flute. The background featured a massive sweeping double staircase and a sparkling chandelier. She had positioned herself perfectly, so the imported marble flooring and the custom mahogany front door were clearly visible. She looked like the ultimate picture of fake suburban wealth. "Living by my own ability gets me here today," she had typed, adding a sparkling star emoji. "So thankful for a husband who provides the absolute best life for his family. Hard work always pays off. Do not be like someone who only knows how to be jealous and bitter. Blessings to everyone this holiday season." She had tagged Malik in the post along with a location check-in for Oak Brook, Illinois. My mother had commented within seconds, calling her a beautiful queen who deserved the world. I stared at the glowing screen, my face completely devoid of emotion. Living by my own ability. The hypocrisy was so dense it was practically suffocating. Stephanie had never worked a meaningful job in her entire 30 years of existence. Her ability consisted solely of whining to our parents until they opened their wallets. And the husband she praised for providing the absolute best life was currently the primary target of a massive federal investigation for stealing relief funds and committing mortgage fraud against his own sister-in-law. They were celebrating a victory built entirely on my stolen identity. They were toasting to a mansion that was purchased using the equity ripped directly from the very walls I was standing inside. And she had the nerve to publicly call me jealous. I did not leave an angry comment exposing her lies. Engaging in a public social media argument was a tactic for amateurs. I was a professional risk auditor executing a targeted financial demolition. Let her soak in the manufactured envy of her peers. It would make the impending crash that much more devastating. I set the phone face down and walked over to my heavy mahogany dining table. The sleek red folder sat exactly where I had left it. I opened the cover. Inside rested the pristine legal documents Jonathan had prepared for Obsidian Asset Management Limited Liability Company. The top document was the official notice of default. The second document was the formal eviction notice. Because Malik had utilized stolen funds to secure the initial high-risk bridge loan, the contract was fundamentally breached from the moment the ink dried. There was no grace period. The private lender had explicitly written the contract to allow for immediate repossession in an event of financial fraud. And today, since my anonymous shell company now owned that contract, I held the absolute authority to drop the hammer. I picked up my heavy silver fountain pen. I looked at the signature line designated for the authorized managing member of Obsidian Asset Management. I did not hesitate. I pressed the nib to the thick legal paper and signed my name with sharp, decisive strokes. The blue ink bled slightly into the page, binding the legal command into reality. I checked my wristwatch. It was exactly 8 in the evening. I sent an encrypted text message to Jonathan confirming the documents were fully executed. He replied instantly, stating that his specialized private process server was already on standby. The server would arrive at the Oak Brook mansion precisely at 8 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day. They would legally serve the eviction notice directly into the hands of Malik and Stephanie before they even had time to digest their morning coffee. The order was absolute. They had exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before law enforcement physically removed them for trespassing on corporate property. They would be legally homeless on the most family-oriented holiday of the year. While I was signing the eviction papers, the federal government was also locking its final pieces into place. Agent Harrison had confirmed that the banking freeze orders were queued in the automated federal routing system. The moment the clock struck midnight, the algorithms would trigger. Every single bank account, credit card and investment portfolio tied to Richard, Barbara, Malik, and Stephanie would be frozen. The digital vault doors would slam shut, trapping all their stolen wealth inside for the Internal Revenue Service to confiscate. I closed the red folder and walked into my expansive kitchen. The organic free-range turkey my mother had demanded was resting in the industrial refrigerator, perfectly brined. The expensive vintage wine Malik preferred was breathing today on the counter. I had prepared the ultimate stage for their final performance. Tomorrow they would wake up to a process server handing them an eviction notice. They would assume it was just a civil misunderstanding they could resolve with a quick bank transfer. They would try to log into their accounts only to find their funds completely inaccessible. Confused and desperate, they would still come to my penthouse for dinner, bringing their fraudulent business loan documents, hoping to force me into signing away another $300,000 to save their sinking ship. They would walk through my front door expecting a feast and compliant victim. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into a federal trap. I turned off the desk lamp, plunging the penthouse into complete darkness. I stood alone in the quiet night, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace. For 33 years, they had treated me like I was invisible. They treated my achievements as nothing more than a convenient resource to be plundered for their own selfish desires. Tomorrow they would all finally see me. The storm was coming and I was holding the lightning. The intercom buzzer echoed through my pristine penthouse at precisely 4 in the afternoon. I stood perfectly still in the center of the kitchen, smoothing the front of my tailored dress. The organic turkey was resting on the marble island. The expensive wine sat breathing next to the crystal decanter. Everything was staged exactly to their demanding specifications. I pressed the entry button on the wall panel, unlocking the lobby elevator. The final act of this grand theatrical performance was about to begin. My front door swung open 5 minutes later. My family did not bother to knock. They marched into my home with the aggressive entitlement of conquering royalty, arriving to collect their spoils. My mother Barbara entered first, wearing a heavy fur coat and an expression of immediate disapproval. She looked around my luxurious penthouse, scanning the high ceilings and modern art with undisguised jealousy. My father Richard followed closely behind, carrying the familiar glossy black folder tucked tightly under his arm. Then came Stephanie and Malik. I observed them with sharp analytical precision. Stephanie was clutching her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. Her usual pristine makeup looked slightly rushed, and her eyes darted nervously around my foyer. Malik trailed behind her, completely lacking his usual arrogant swagger. He was sweating despite the freezing Chicago temperature outside. His solid gold Rolex caught the light, but his hands were vibrating with a subtle, uncontrollable tremor. The private process server had clearly executed the eviction notice this morning. The federal banking algorithms had undoubtedly frozen their accounts at midnight. They were terrified, desperate, and completely cornered. But instead of showing humility, they masked their sheer panic with loud, aggressive hostility. "It smells like burnt rosemary in here," my mother announced, tossing her fur coat onto my expensive velvet sofa without waiting for me to offer a hanger. "I explicitly told you to use Sage, Caroline. Do you ever listen to simple instructions? You have this massive, beautiful kitchen and you still cannot manage to cook a proper holiday meal." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. The dining room is ready." They pushed past me, migrating directly to the massive mahogany dining table. They took their seats without a single word of gratitude for the lavish spread I had prepared. I watched Malik immediately reach for the wine bottle. He poured a heavy measure into his crystal glass, completely ignoring the rest of the table. He took a fast, desperate gulp and immediately slammed the glass down with a loud, harsh clack. "What is this garbage?" Malik snapped, glaring at the bottle. "I specifically texted you the exact reserve vintage I require for client dinners. This is a standard estate blend. It tastes like cheap vinegar. You cannot even get a simple wine order right." Stephanie crossed her arms, letting out a loud theatrical sigh. "Honestly, Caroline, you are so embarrassing. Malik is dealing with a massive corporate transition right now. We had an incredibly stressful morning with some absolute idiot making a clerical error regarding our property title. We have been on the phone with bankers all day trying to sort out ridiculous administrative glitches. The least you could do is provide decent alcohol to help my husband relax." My father pounded his fist on the table, silencing the room. The silverware rattled against the porcelain plates. "Enough about the wine," Richard commanded, his voice booming with forced authoritarian bravado. "We do not have time to sit here and critique the menu. We are on a strict deadline and we need to handle the family business right now." He picked up the glossy black folder and threw it violently across the mahogany table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping mere inches from my dinner plate. "The Small Business Administration loan documents," Richard stated, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute ruthless pressure. "The federal underwriters need the finalized guarantor signature verified and uploaded to the banking portal immediately. Malik has a warehouse contract that is going to expire tonight. You need to sign the remaining paperwork for the $300,000 right now. Malik needs that cash wired into his operating account before midnight to close the deal." I looked down at the black folder, then back up at my father. "Before midnight," I asked, maintaining a perfectly steady tone. "On a federal holiday." "Do not question the timeline, Caroline," my mother hissed, leaning aggressively across the table. Her face was flushed with a frantic, manic energy. "Your brother-in-law has international investors waiting on this capital injection. He has temporary liquidity issues because of a massive banking error this morning. The banks froze his accounts for a security audit right when he needed to finalize his expansion. You are going to sign that document and use your corporate credentials to force the federal approval through." Malik wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, leaning toward me with a desperate, menacing glare. "Listen to me very carefully, Caroline. I have $500,000 tied up in an administrative lock right now. I need this $300,000 bridge loan to secure the logistics fleet. You are going to pick up a pen, and you are going to sign your name on the guarantor line. You owe this family your loyalty." They were cornered rats, vicious and completely delusional. They genuinely believed that the federal asset freeze and the eviction notice were just minor administrative errors. They believed that bullying me into signing another fraudulent federal document would magically inject $300,000 into their frozen accounts, saving them from the impending collapse. They sat in my home eating my food, drinking my wine, and violently demanding I sacrifice my entire professional license to save their sinking ship. I looked at my mother, who was glaring at me with pure venom. I looked at Stephanie, who was tapping her foot impatiently, expecting my immediate submission. I looked at Malik, whose fake billionaire facade was cracking under the weight of his own criminal incompetence. Finally, I looked at my father, the man who had stolen my identity to fund this entire pathetic circus. "Sign the damn paper," Caroline Richard ordered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Stop being a selfish, ungrateful disappointment. You will sign it right now, or you will never be part of this family again." I reached out and placed my hand firmly on top of the black folder. The room held its collective breath, waiting for me to break. They expected the obedient daughter to yield to their aggressive demands. They expected me to cave under the weight of their synchronized emotional abuse. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up, towering over the table. The time for playing the victim was officially over. I pushed the glossy black folder away from me. I did not just slide it back across the mahogany table. I shoved it with the heel of my hand with such forceful momentum that it launched across the polished wood, struck my father directly in the chest, and dropped heavily onto his lap. The printed pages of the fraudulent federal application spilled out, scattering across the expensive linen napkins and the crystal glassware. "No," I said. My voice was not loud. It was not shaking. It was a single, flat syllable of absolute finality. The silence that followed was so profound, it felt like the air pressure in the penthouse had suddenly dropped. They stared at the spilled papers, and then up at me, as if I had just spoken a foreign language. They could not process the concept of defiance. For 3 decades, my role was to absorb their demands and quietly comply. This single word shattered their entire operational reality. Then the illusion broke, and pure, unadulterated chaos erupted. My father, Richard, shot up from his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his stiff white collar. He slammed both of his fists onto the table, causing the wine glasses to topple over. Dark red vintage wine spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, soaking into the fraudulent federal documents. "How dare you!" he roared, the sound reverberating off the high ceilings. "I did not come to your home to ask for a favor, Caroline. I gave you a direct order. You will pick up that pen right now, and you will sign those documents, or so help me God, I will destroy you. I am your father. You do not defy me." My mother. Barbara leapt to her feet, knocking her dining chair backward. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack, but she did not even blink. Her face contorted into a mask of absolute hatred, shedding any remaining pretense of maternal affection. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my face. "We gave you life. We raised you. We allowed you to become this arrogant corporate snob, and this is how you repay us. You are a cold-blooded, cruel, useless child. You sit up here in your ivory tower looking down on us while your own sister is in the middle of the worst day of her life. You are a complete disgrace to this family." Stephanie was already in motion. She stood up, tears streaming down her face, ruining her flawless, expensive makeup. But these were not her usual manipulative, theatrical tears. These were tears of genuine terror and unhinged panic. The eviction notice served by my anonymous shell company this morning and the frozen bank accounts had clearly pushed her to the absolute edge of her sanity. She slammed her hands against her temples, looking wildly around the room as if the walls were closing in on her. "We do not matter to you, do we?" Stephanie cried out, her voice breaking into a hysterical screech. Do you not consider us family? Malik and I are drowning today. We have been fighting with banks all morning. We have some insane process server stalking our property, giving us 24 hours to vacate our own home. We are trying to build a future and you are just standing there watching us suffer. You are a monster, Caroline. You have no heart. You have no soul. You hate me because Malik loves me and nobody will ever love you. Malik remained seated, but his posture had entirely collapsed. The fake billionaire facade was completely gone. He stared at the scattered loan documents soaking in the spilled red wine like a drowning man watching his last life raft sink into the ocean. He muttered under his breath, cursing me, cursing the banks, cursing the universe for his own catastrophic failures. He reached for the wine bottle, but his hands were shaking so violently he nearly knocked it off the table. He was a cornered rat, realizing that his financial manipulation had reached a dead end. I stood at the head of the table, letting their verbal abuse wash over me. A year ago, these exact words would have crushed my spirit. I would have internalized their venom and begged for their forgiveness on my knees. I would have signed the papers just to make the aggressive yelling stop. But today their insults were nothing more than the desperate flailing of cornered criminals. They called me cold-blooded. They called me cruel. They called me a useless child. They hurled every insecurity they had, weaponized against me since childhood. They wanted to break me down to a manageable size so they could extract the resources they needed to survive the federal trap. They did not even know they were actively standing inside. You are a total defect, my mother continued, her voice cracking with rage as she stepped closer to me. You are 33 years old, and you have nothing of value. No husband, no children, no legacy. You only have money, and you are too much of a miser to even share it with the people who brought you into this world. You are so heartless, Caroline. You are going to die completely alone, and you will deserve every single second of your miserable isolation. I will disown you. My father threatened, his voice dropping to a menacing, guttural snarl. I will make sure every single person in our family knows what a treacherous, backstabbing failure you are. I will call your corporate executives and tell them you are mentally unstable. I will ruin your precious career. I will strip you of everything you hold dear. Pick up the pen, Caroline. This is your absolute last chance to save yourself from our wrath. I looked at the four of them. I took in the sheer magnitude of their entitlement and their moral bankruptcy. I looked at the spilled wine dripping onto the floor. I looked at the fraudulent documents resting on my dining table. And then I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate, chilling smile. It was not a smile of joy or amusement. It was the smile of an executioner, watching the blade lock into its final position. The room suddenly grew deathly quiet as they registered my expression. My lack of fear confused them. My quiet amusement terrified them. They realized their screams were having absolutely no effect. Believe me, I replied, my voice completely calm, slicing through the heavy tension in the room like a perfectly sharpened knife. I care. I care very much. I reached into the pocket of my tailored dress and pulled out my smartphone. My movements were slow and deliberate, completely unhurried by the frantic energy radiating from my parents and my sister. I did not break eye contact with my father as I tapped the screen. My penthouse was equipped with a state-of-the-art surround sound system seamlessly integrated into the high ceilings. It was designed to play soft background music during elegant dinner parties. Tonight, it was going to broadcast a masterpiece of criminal stupidity. I swiped open my encrypted Vault application. I selected the audio file I had painstakingly preserved and isolated. Then I pressed play. The sudden aggressive sound of a roaring car engine blasted from the overhead speakers. The heavy bass of a hip-hop track vibrated through the dining room walls. Stephanie flinched, looking up at the ceiling in pure confusion. Malik froze. His eyes darted toward the speakers, and I watched the exact millisecond his brain recognized the acoustic background of his own stolen luxury vehicle. Then his voice echoed through my home, loud, unfiltered, and dripping with unparalleled arrogance. "Yeah, man, the new ride handles like an absolute dream," Malik bragged through the speakers. "Tell the guys to get the warehouse lease ready. We are good to go for the launch. And do not worry about the funding. We have the ultimate cash cow lined up." Malik stopped breathing. The fake billionaire posture vanished, instantly replaced by the rigid paralysis of a hunted animal realizing it had just stepped on a landmine. The recording continued mercilessly. "Just force that old spinster sister to host the turkey dinner on Thursday. She is completely pathetic and easy to bend. All her mother has to do is yell a little, and she folds like wet paper. Richard already has her perfectly on the hook. She agreed to everything this morning." My mother Barbara let out a sharp gasp. She had just poured herself a fresh glass of the vintage wine I provided, holding the crystal stem tightly in her right hand. When she heard Malik describe her as a cheap tool used to manipulate me, her fingers went entirely slack. The expensive crystal goblet slipped from her grasp. It hit the hardwood floor with a violent, shattering crash. Dark red wine splattered across the polished wood and onto her designer shoes, but she did not even look down. She stared at the speakers, her mouth hanging open in sheer horror. "Next month, my father-in-law said we will just use the rest of her social security number to leverage another massive line of credit for the logistics company," Malik's voice continued echoing above us. "We are talking $500,000 easily. She will not even notice until we are millionaires, and we can just toss her a few grand to keep her quiet. She is just a sad, lonely woman anyway. Her credit is doing better with us using it." The recording ended with the sharp sound of the sports car accelerating, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The aggressive shouting that had filled my dining room just moments ago was completely extinguished. The psychological dynamic of the room had inverted so violently that it felt like gravity had suddenly shifted. I walked slowly around the edge of the mahogany table, the crunch of broken crystal under my heels, the only sound breaking the dead silence. I stopped right behind Malik. He was staring straight ahead, his chest rising and falling in shallow, frantic breaths. The sweat on his forehead was now gleaming under the chandelier light. He knew exactly what that recording was. He knew he had sent it to the family group chat by accident on Tuesday morning. And he knew with absolute certainty that deleting it had achieved absolutely nothing. "You deleted it from the chat application, Malik," I whispered, leaning down so my voice was right next to his ear. "But you forgot that I work in digital risk compliance. My devices automatically archive and encrypt all incoming media. You literally broadcast a fully detailed confession of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft directly to a professional auditor." Stephanie turned to look at her husband, her face a mask of absolute bewilderment and rising terror. "Malik, what is she talking about?" Stephanie asked, her voice trembling. "What did you mean about using her social security number? What $500,000? Malik could not answer her. He could not form a single word. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked erratically in his cheek. He was mentally calculating how many years in a federal penitentiary that audio file was going to cost him. My father Richard looked like he was going to have a cardiac event. The crimson color of his rage had entirely drained away, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His hands rested flat on the table, trembling visibly. He was a man who prided himself on control, on being the smartest operator in the room. Hearing his own son-in-law implicate him in a massive criminal conspiracy out loud in high-definition audio completely destroyed his patriarchal facade. "That recording is illegal." Richard finally choked out his voice, a raspy whisper completely stripped of its previous authority. "You cannot record us without permission." "It is not a secret recording, Dad," I replied, walking back to the head of the table. "He sent it to me." He willingly transmitted a voice memo across state digital lines, outlining a coordinated plan to steal my identity and commit bank fraud. It is not just legal evidence. It is a gift-wrapped present for a federal prosecutor. My mother Barbara was staring at the puddle of spilled wine around her shoes, shivering despite her heavy fur coat. "Caroline, please!" She stammered, the venom completely gone from her tone, replaced by raw panic. "We can explain this." Malik was just boasting. Men boast when they are with their friends. It was just foolish talk. Your father would never actually use your identity without asking. I looked at her, letting a cold smile touch my lips. "Do not lie to me, Mom. Not anymore. I know exactly what you did. I know about the $150,000 home equity loan you secured against this very penthouse. I know Richard forged my digital signature on the application using the fake tax document excuse. I know you funneled the stolen equity into the Richard and Barbara Family Legacy Trust." Richard physically recoiled, his chair scraping backward against the floor. "How do you know about the trust?" he breathed out, the realization hitting him that I had unraveled their entire operation. "I know that you used my stolen equity to buy Malik that Porsche Cayenne," I continued, my voice rising with absolute undeniable authority. "I know you used the rest to pay the title company escrow for Stephanie and her new mansion in Oakbrook. I know you submitted a fake payroll manifest to steal $250,000 in Paycheck Protection Program funds last year and pinned the corporate liability on me. I audited every single fraudulent wire transfer you executed over the past 18 months. I know everything." The air in the room grew completely stagnant. There was no more gaslighting. There were no more theatrical tears from Stephanie claiming I was jealous. There was no more posturing from Malik about building a legacy. The impenetrable wall of their deception had been smashed to pieces, and they were left standing naked in the wreckage. They finally understood that the daughter they had treated like a disposable resource was actually the architect of their impending destruction. I stood tall at the head of my table, looking down at the people who had terrorized my emotional life for 3 decades. The game of playing the ungrateful child was officially over. I reached down and picked up my briefcase, preparing to deliver the final lethal blow. The absolute silence in my dining room shattered the moment my father realized the total scope of his exposure. Richard possessed the primal, desperate instinct of a cornered predator. His eyes darted from my face to the smartphone resting on the polished mahogany table. He genuinely believed that the physical device was the only thing anchoring his crimes to reality. With a sudden, explosive roar, he lunged across the table. His heavy body knocked the crystal decanter and the expensive platter of organic turkey completely off the surface. Plates shattered against the hardwood floor, but he did not care. His large hands grabbed my smartphone. He raised it high above his head, his face twisted into a mask of pure feral rage, and hurled it violently against the solid marble edge of my kitchen island. The device cracked instantly, the glass screen spiderwebbing into 100 fractured pieces. The metal casing bent under the sheer force of the impact. The phone bounced off the marble and skidded across the floor, stopping near my mother and her ruined designer shoes. Richard stood there, chest heaving, panting heavily. A sick, triumphant grin began to form on his pale face. He straightened his ruined tailored suit jacket, breathing heavily through his nose. He looked at me, expecting to see panic. He expected to see the terrified little girl he had bullied for 3 decades mourning the loss of her only weapon. I did not move a single muscle. I stood at the head of the ruined table and let out a soft, genuine laugh. "You destroyed a piece of glass and lithium, Dad," I said, my voice echoing smoothly in the tense room. "I literally just told you that I work in digital risk compliance." That audio file was automatically encrypted and synced to 3 separate secure cloud servers the exact second Malik sent it to the group chat. Federal agents have already downloaded the master copy. Smashing my phone just adds destruction of property to your impending federal indictment. The triumphant grin vanished from his face, instantly replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of absolute defeat. I reached down into my leather briefcase resting on the chair beside me. The time for talking was over. It was time to execute the final financial demolition. I pulled out 3 thick, heavy red folders. The bright crimson color stood out violently against the dark wood of the dining table and the spilled red wine. I held them in my hands, feeling the weight of their destruction. I slammed the first red folder onto the table right in front of Richard and Malik. That is a copy of an official Internal Revenue Service Form 211. I announced, my voice ringing with total authority. The application for award for original information. I officially registered as a federal whistleblower against your entire criminal syndicate. But that is just the cover page. Underneath it are the federal warrants authorizing the immediate seizure of the Richard and Barbara Family Legacy Trust. Malik stumbled backward, hitting the wall. What does that mean? Malik stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. It means that at exactly midnight last night, federal banking algorithms locked every single financial node connected to your names, I explained, locking my eyes onto his terrified face. Your checking accounts are frozen. Your savings are frozen. The corporate accounts for your fake logistics firm are frozen. You cannot withdraw a single dollar. You cannot buy a cup of coffee. The United States Treasury has officially financially paralyzed you, pending federal asset forfeiture. My mother let out a strangled wailing sound, clutching her fur coat tightly against her chest. She looked at my father, begging him to say it was a lie, but Richard was entirely mute, staring in horror at the red folder. I slammed the second red folder onto the table, pushing it directly into my father and his line of sight. That is the Federal Bureau of Investigation criminal referral. I continued relentlessly. It details aggravated identity theft, coordinated wire fraud, and the theft of $250,000 in federal relief funds. Agent Harrison and Agent Miller from the Federal Task Force have already reviewed the evidence. They know about the forged signatures. They know about the phantom warehouse employees. You are not going to a civil courtroom, Dad. You are going to a federal penitentiary. Stephanie let out a blood-curdling scream. She grabbed Malik by the lapels of his flashy suit, shaking him violently. Tell me, she is lying, Malik. Stephanie shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass windows. Tell me we still have the money. Tell me we still have the house. We just moved in. I smiled, picking up the third and final red folder. I walked around the table, stepping over the broken plates, and stood directly in front of my sister. I held the folder out to her. Her hands were shaking so violently, she could barely take it from my grasp. Open it, Stephanie, I commanded. She flipped the heavy red cover open. Her eyes darted frantically across the legal text. She did not understand the dense corporate jargon, but she recognized the bold black letters at the top of the page. Notice of default and immediate eviction. Malik used a toxic high-interest private bridge loan to buy your Oak Brook mansion. I explained, my voice devoid of any pity. He bypassed traditional banks because he is a serial bankrupt. But he violated the loan covenants the second he used stolen federal funds to secure the financing. Earlier this week, I set up an anonymous Delaware shell company. I used my own legitimate corporate bonuses to purchase your exact promissory note directly from the private lender. They sold your debt to me to wash their hands of your impending federal indictment. Stephanie dropped the folder, the papers scattering across her expensive boots. I am your sole legal creditor, I stated, letting the absolute reality of my words crush her. I own the debt on your pristine suburban mansion. Because you secured it with a felony, the loan defaulted instantly. The private process server who approached your gate this morning was not delivering a clerical error. He was delivering a legal mandate from me. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before law enforcement physically removes you for trespassing on my corporate property. You are legally homeless. The entire room collapsed into a symphony of absolute despair. My mother was weeping uncontrollably on the floor, ruined by the knowledge that her wealthy socialite facade was permanently destroyed. Malik was hyperventilating, leaning against the wall with his hands covering his face, realizing his fake billionaire lifestyle was ending in a federal prison cell. My father stood frozen, staring blankly at the shattered remains of my smartphone, his legacy entirely burned to ashes. Stephanie was sobbing hysterically, clutching her designer handbag, as if it could somehow shield her from the brutal reality of the freezing Chicago streets awaiting her tomorrow. I stood tall amidst the wreckage of their lives. I looked at the ruined Thanksgiving feast, the spilled wine, the broken crystal, and the shattered remnants of their parasitic entitlement. I looked directly at my mother and father. "Do not worry about the catering bill tonight," I said, my voice perfectly calm and laced with absolute venomous satisfaction. "I already paid for it using your mansion and your freedom. Happy Thanksgiving." Malik shook his head wildly, his eyes darting frantically between the stark red folders and my completely impassive face. "No!" he gasped out, stepping backward until his spine hit the custom cabinetry of my kitchen island. "This is a bluff. You are bluffing, Caroline. You do not possess the power or the clearance to freeze offshore accounts. My brokers are top tier. I am an elite investor navigating complex financial waters." His voice cracked, pitching upward into a pathetic, frantic whine that entirely stripped away his carefully cultivated masculine facade. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket with violently trembling fingers and pulled out his smartphone. I stood silently and watched him dial the premium concierge line for his private banking institution. His hands were shaking so severely he dropped the sleek device onto the marble counter once before managing to press the speakerphone icon. He wanted to prove me wrong in front of Richard and Stephanie. He desperately needed to hear a human voice tell him his stolen funds were perfectly secure. The automated greeting chimed through the destroyed dining room, echoing off the high ceilings. "Welcome to Premium Client Services. Please enter your secure account number." Malik punched the digits with frantic urgency, hitting the glass screen so hard I thought it might shatter. The system processed the request for a grueling, agonizing 10 seconds. Then the cheerful automated voice shifted into a flat, mechanical monotone. "We are sorry. Your accounts have been subjected to a mandatory federal administrative hold. All linked assets are currently frozen pending a priority investigation by the United States Department of the Treasury. Please contact federal law enforcement authorities for any further information. Goodbye." The line disconnected with a sharp, hollow click. Malik stared at the blank screen of his phone, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. His knees buckled entirely, giving way beneath his weight. He slid down the expensive cabinetry and hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud, dropping the device. He clutched his chest, gasping rapidly for air, as a full-blown panic attack seized his lungs, rendering him completely immobilized. The mechanical voice of the federal banking system was the final catalyst needed to completely shatter Stephanie and her fragile suburban delusion. The designer lifestyle she had flaunted online, the sprawling Oakbrook mansion she had bragged about, the fake billionaire husband she had paraded around the country club, all of it dissolved into toxic smoke in a matter of seconds. Stephanie let out a visceral, blood-curdling scream that ripped through the quiet penthouse. It was not a cry of sadness or mourning, but a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage and narcissistic collapse. She turned her wild, tear-streaked face toward Malik, who was still curled on the floor, gasping for oxygen like a dying fish. "You lied to me," Stephanie shrieked, lunging across the room with her hands raised like claws. "You told me you were a financial genius. You told me we were completely untouchable." She threw herself onto him, her manicured nails digging violently into the lapels of his expensive imported suit. "You stupid, worthless fraud. You used my sister to fund your pathetic vanity projects and you got us caught. You are going to a federal prison and you are leaving me completely homeless on the freezing street." She began hitting his chest, her fists pounding against him in a frantic, unhinged rhythm, tearing at his silk tie and ripping the fabric of his shirt. Malik did not even attempt to defend himself against her assault. He just curled into a tighter ball on the floor, sobbing audibly, as his wife physically destroyed his expensive clothing. My father Richard stood entirely paralyzed, incapable of intervening, as his perfect golden child viciously attacked her fake millionaire husband right in the middle of my ruined dining room. Then came the most profoundly pathetic spectacle of the entire evening. My mother Barbara, the arrogant woman who had just 20 minutes ago called me an empty vessel who did not know how to love, suddenly fell to her knees. She collapsed onto the floor, crawling across the wine-stained hardwood, ignoring the sharp shards of broken crystal cutting into her expensive nylon stockings. She dragged her heavy fur coat through the spilled alcohol, crawling directly to my feet and reaching out to grab the hem of my tailored dress with desperate clutching hands. "Caroline, please!" Barbara wailed, her face completely distorted by raw, absolute terror and ugly, smeared makeup. "Please, sweetheart, you have to stop this immediately. You have to call those federal agents and tell them it was all a huge misunderstanding. Tell them you gave us verbal permission to use your identity. Tell them we are a loving family. We can fix this massive mistake. We can sell the Porsche tomorrow morning. We can give you the house back and transfer the trust fund. Just pick up your phone and cancel the warrants before they ruin our lives." I looked down at the woman who had terrorized my emotional existence for 3 long decades. I saw absolutely no maternal love in her desperate, weeping eyes. I only saw a coward terrified of trading her elite country club membership for a federal prison jumpsuit. I reached down, grabbed her wrists firmly, and forcefully peeled her hands off my pristine clothing. "You do not ever get to call me sweetheart again," I stated, my voice radiating absolute glacial indifference. "And you do not get to undo a coordinated federal crime just because you finally realized you are not the smartest operator in the room. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about your pathetic crying apologies, Barbara. They only care about the $250,000 you brazenly stole from the government and funneled into your personal legacy trust. The paperwork is legally filed. The trap is permanently sprung. There is absolutely nothing you or anyone else can do to stop the federal avalanche rapidly descending upon you." I turned away from her sobbing, trembling form and walked briskly over to the sleek digital intercom panel mounted on the wall near my heavy front door. I pressed the red emergency button that connected directly to the elite 24-hour security team monitoring my luxury residential building. A sharp static click echoed through the speaker, followed immediately by the deep authoritative voice of the head of security. "Yes, Miss Caroline, is everything all right up there?" I stared at the pathetic, wretched wreckage of my biological family. My mother weeping hysterically on the floor, covering her face in shame. Malik having a severe panic attack against the cabinets, while Stephanie continued screaming and sobbing over her ruined social life. And my father standing there like a hollowed-out shell of a broken man, entirely stripped of his pride, his wealth, and his power. "I need an immediate extraction unit dispatched to the penthouse level," I ordered, my voice echoing clearly and coldly over the intercom system. "I have 4 individuals currently trespassing on my private property. They are becoming highly volatile, violent, and they are explicitly refusing to leave my home. Please send a full security detail up here right now and physically escort these illegal trespassers out of my building. If they resist your commands in any way, you have my full authorization to contact the Chicago Police Department and have them arrested and processed for breaking and entering." "Understood, Ms. Caroline." The security chief replied instantly, his tone deadly serious. "A tactical team is heading up the private elevator right now." I released the intercom button and leaned against the heavy oak door, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. I looked at the 4 of them as the brutal realization of their immediate physical expulsion washed over their panicked faces. "The security team is roughly 60 seconds away from this door," I announced softly, standing perfectly calm amidst their total, utter destruction. "I highly suggest you gather whatever tiny fraction is left of your dignity and walk out of my home before heavily armed guards drag you into the lobby by your hair." 6 months passed with the rapid, undeniable efficiency of the federal justice system. The seasons changed from the bitter, freezing winter of Thanksgiving into a bright, unforgiving Chicago spring. I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse downtown, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, watching the absolute destruction of my former family play out in real time. Richard and Malik did not look like proud patriarchs or elite tech investors anymore. They wore matching orange jumpsuits, their wrists and ankles bound by heavy steel chains. The federal judge presiding over their case had zero patience for white-collar criminals who stole relief funds meant for struggling American workers. The evidence Jonathan and the federal agents compiled was so overwhelmingly airtight that their public defenders advised them to take a blind plea deal, just to avoid decades behind bars. Richard received a sentence of 84 months in a federal penitentiary for aggravated identity theft and tax evasion. He stood before the judge, a broken, trembling old man stripped of all his arrogant authority, weeping openly as the heavy wooden gavel slammed down. Malik received an even harsher sentence of 120 months for orchestrating the wire fraud and engineering the fake logistics company. The fake billionaire was going to spend the next 10 years of his life in a concrete cell completely stripped of his designer suits and his solid gold Rolex. I watched the armed federal marshals physically escort them out of the courtroom. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or regret. I only felt the profound, satisfying weight of pure justice anchoring me to the floor. The financial fallout for the women who enabled their crimes was equally catastrophic and swift. Because the Richard and Barbara Family Legacy Trust was built entirely on stolen federal funds, the government executed a total asset forfeiture. My parents lost absolutely everything they owned. The bank foreclosed on their comfortable suburban home, the very house where they had spent 30 years cultivating their fake high society image. My mother, Barbara, was forced to move into a tiny government-subsidized apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. Her wealthy country club friends abandoned her, instantly erasing her phone number the moment the massive fraud scandal hit the local evening news. But the most poetic justice of all was reserved for my golden child sister, Stephanie. The morning after Thanksgiving, my anonymous shell company legally enforced the eviction notice without a shred of mercy. The local sheriff department physically escorted her off the Oak Brook property, while she screamed and cried on the manicured front lawn. Today, the woman who bragged online about living by her own ability is actually doing exactly that. Stephanie currently works 39 hours a week as a cashier at a discount supermarket. She lives in a run-down studio apartment with bad plumbing and noisy neighbors. She spends her exhausting days scanning barcodes and bagging groceries for minimum wage, experiencing the brutal reality of actual independence. She tried to call me once from an untraceable burner phone, sobbing hysterically and begging for a second chance to be a real sister. I blocked the number before she could even finish her first pathetic sentence. The parasite had been permanently and legally severed from its host. I stood on the expansive private balcony of my downtown penthouse, letting the warm spring breeze wash over my face. The city of Chicago stretched out beneath me, a sprawling grid of bright lights and endless possibilities. The heavy mahogany dining table inside was newly polished, completely free of fraudulent loan documents and spilled red wine. My life was completely my own again, unburdened by their constant demands and their toxic conditional love. I held a thick manila envelope in my hand. It bore the official seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. I slid my finger under the paper flap and pulled out the crisp, highly secured document resting securely inside. It was my official whistleblower reward check from the Internal Revenue Service. Because my detailed corporate audit allowed the federal government to successfully recover the stolen relief funds and heavily penalize the tax evasion the law dictated, I receive a mandatory percentage of the reclaimed assets. I stared at the bold numbers printed cleanly across the federal check. It was a massive 7-figure sum. It was more than enough to completely pay off my penthouse mortgage and fully fund my own independent investment portfolio for the rest of my life. The very government they tried to defraud using my stolen name had just rewarded me handsomely for turning them in. It was the ultimate financial victory. I walked back into my quiet kitchen and poured myself a generous glass of premium vintage wine, the exact kind my family had so arrogantly demanded and then violently complained about. I raised the crystal glass to the empty room, toasting to my own resilience and my unwavering professional discipline. They had spent my entire life calling me cold, calculating and selfish, simply because I refused to be their compliant sacrificial lamb. They forced me to become a ruthless auditor, to survive their constant emotional and financial exploitation. And in the end, That exact ruthlessness was the weapon that completely dismantled their entire parasitic empire. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the rich red wine, tasting the absolute purity of total freedom. I was no longer the disappointing spinster sister or the convenient automated bank account. I was a sovereign, independent woman who had successfully and surgically excised a malignant tumor from her life. Blood does not automatically make someone family. Blood only makes you biologically related. True family requires mutual respect, genuine support, and basic human decency. When those core elements are replaced by manipulation, greed, and felony fraud, the only logical response is absolute destruction. Have you ever had to use the law to punish relatives who took advantage of your loyalty and drained your resources? Where do you personally draw the line between forgiving a family member and permanently cutting them out of your life? Share your own stories in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about surviving toxic environments and finding your true, ultimate freedom. The most profound lesson we can extract from this ordeal is that biology does not automatically grant someone a free pass to exploit your life. For far too long, society has pushed the narrative that family is everything, and that you must forgive toxic relatives simply because you share the same bloodline. But the truth is much harsher and much more liberating. Blood merely makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and basic human decency are what actually make you family. When those core elements are replaced by manipulation, greed, and absolute entitlement, you have every right to walk away. Many of us are conditioned from childhood to be the reliable safety net for relatives who refuse to take accountability for their own disastrous choices. We are taught that setting financial or emotional boundaries is selfish. However, true selfishness belongs to those who view your hard-earned success as their personal bank account. Protecting your assets, your credit score, and your mental health is not a betrayal of your family. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You do not owe your future to people who actively plot your destruction behind your back. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. True empowerment comes from realizing that your worth is not defined by how much abuse you can tolerate, but by how fiercely you are willing to defend your own peace. When people show you their true colors through emotional blackmail or unhinged greed, believe them the very first time. Walk away, build your own fortress, and never apologize for refusing to be a victim. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with toxic relatives to protect your own future? So share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering journeys of breaking free.